The Bed Shadow by Eric Summers. "You can't let your feet hang off the bed like that, Millie," Sarah whispered as loudly as she could. Millie's face turned white, and she jerked her feet back up on top of the bed. Had she felt something touch the bottom of her foot? She moved closer to her older sister and huddled up tight against her. Both girls held their breath. The only sound was that of the wind shaking the trees outside and rattling the shutters on their windows. The only light was from a flickering candle on the table next to the bed that cast moving shadows across the walls. "Do you think it's gone?" Millie said softly. "Never," Sarah answered. So they sat in the middle of the bed, both of them trying not to notice that the candle was getting shorter and shorter and would soon go out. Every sound they heard turned their blood cold. Was it a mouse? Was it an acorn hitting the roof? Or was it something far worse? "We need a new candle," Sarah whispered as the flames began to sputter more and more. "I need to use the bathroom," Millie answered. Sarah sighed. She loved Millie, but she was scared to take care of her alone. She was scared because she knew that if the time ever came that the candle went out, or her sister rolled off the bed by accident, there would be no way to save Millie, or herself. As the candle burned down, the shadows in the room grew larger. But no shadow was as large as the one that always surrounded the bed at night. The shadow that was always there even when the candles burned brightest. The only thing that made the bed shadow go away was the light of the sun. Sarah peeked over the edge of the bed. The bed shadow was quite large now, and even as she watched, it seemed to get bigger, spreading out around the bed like a growing pool of blood. Just looking at the shadow made all of her bad memories and every nightmare she ever had wake up and crawl around in her head. "Can we make it?" Millie asked. Even on the far side of the bed, Sarah could feel her sister trembling. "I can," Sarah said. There was no point in lying. "But I need to go to the bathroom." "You should have gone before the sun went down," Sarah snapped. "You should have gotten more candles," Millie replied. Both girls immediately felt horrible for blaming each other. Sarah crawled back to the center of the bed, and the sisters hugged each other tightly. "What time is it?" Millie asked in a soft whisper. "Shouldn't the sun be up by now?" "I don't know," Sarah answered. The nights always seemed to go on forever. Trapped in their bed from dusk until dawn, the girls rarely slept. It was too dangerous. They tried to entertain each other with stories and games and songs, but joy was hard to find by the light of a candle surrounded by a shadow that seemed to have a mind of its own. "I can jump. There's still time," Sarah said. "I can make it to the parlor and get more candles quick as a wink." "What if you don't make it?" Millie demanded. "What if the shadow gets you?" "I will make it," Sarah said, "and it won't get me." Sarah crawled to the edge of the bed again and peeked over. The shadow was bigger, but she could still make the jump. She could make the jump, run down the hall, grab the candles, and be back in bed in no time at all. It sounded so simple that she almost believed it. "Don't go, Sarah. Don't leave me alone." Millie's plea tugged at Sarah's heart. It would be so easy to stay and keep her sister from being scared. But if she did, neither of them might see the sun come up. "Trust me," Sarah said, and then she stood up and jumped. Her bare feet came down hard on the wooden floor. The back of her left foot was in the bed shadow. Her leg erupted in pain. It felt like something was chewing through her skin. "Run, Sarah!" she heard Millie scream from the bed. So Sarah ran. As soon as her foot was off the shadow, the pain went away, mostly. The memory and shock of the pain remained, but she would have to deal with that later. All that mattered now was getting the candles. She ran out of the door of the bedroom and down the hall, guided only by the pale light of the moon coming through the shuttered windows. She reached the parlor as quick as a wink, just as she had promised Millie. Sarah grabbed all the candles that she could hold, and a few that she couldn't, and started back toward the bedroom even though her brain was telling her not to. A few candles slipped out of her hands and rolled around on the ground behind her. "Millie, I'm here!" she cried as she ran through the door, but then her breath stopped. The bedroom was nearly completely dark. The candle had burned down to the tiniest nub and would soon go out. The bed shadow was enormous now. There was no way she could jump across it, and she could feel it daring her to try. Millie sat on the bed, her head buried in her knees, rocking back and forth sobbing. She knew that it was all over now. Sarah almost gave up herself, but realized that she had nothing to lose by at least trying to save her sister. She looked quickly around the room and spotted the dresser against the wall. The shadow on the floor had not quite reached it yet. If she could make it, there might still be hope. But she had to move now. There was no more time to find a better way. Sarah dashed toward the dresser, coming close to the shadow, her bare feet slapping against the cold wooden floor. When she hoped she was close enough, she jumped with all of her strength. Her feet left the floor and she dove on top of the dresser, sending bottles and brushes and buttons flying in every direction. Millie screamed and Sarah turned to see that the shadow was reaching up toward her, a dark hand trying to grasp at her arms that were still hanging off of the dresser. She stood up quickly, one bare foot coming down hard on a hairbrush that hurt almost as much as the shadow had hurt her foot earlier. She winced, but did not cry out. She focused on Millie. She did not have time for fear or pain. She only had time to try and save her little sister. Inside her head, she measured the distance between where she stood on the dresser and the bed. It seemed much, much further than she had guessed a minute ago. She did not know if she could make the jump. She could miss, fall short, land completely in the shadow, and then it would be over for her, and there would be no one left to save Millie. She had to try. She took one last deep breath and knelt down as low as she could without letting the reaching shadow touch her. Then she jumped. She sailed through the air and with a loud thump landed safely on the mattress. The candles she had brought with her flew in every direction, but a few stayed in her hands. She sat up and crawled quickly across the bed and touched the wick of the new candle to the faintly glowing wick of the old one and held her breath. For a moment nothing happened, and Sarah sighed. It would soon be over, but at least she had tried. Then the new candle flared to life, its bright flame filling the room. Sarah turned to her sister only to see that the shadow was still up off of the floor and its long black hand was about to close around her sister's neck. Sarah leaped at the shadow and tried to push it away, but her hands went right through the shadow as if it didn't even exist, but there was still an enormous amount of pain. The sisters screamed and moved to the top of the bed, their backs against the headboard as the shadow creeped ever closer. They held each other tight, so tight that it hurt, but neither of them complained. The shadow was only inches away from them now. The new candle fell over and went out. The room plunged into darkness. "I love you, Sarah. I love you too, Millie." Both girls closed their eyes and waited for the terrible things that were about to happen to them. They were both horribly afraid, but the fact that they were together made it just a little bit better. Neither sister felt the need to say goodbye. Nothing happened. For a long moment the girls kept their eyes closed and held their breath, waiting for the end. But nothing happened. Sarah opened her eyes and she could see. The room was not pitch black as it had been before. There was light, sunlight streaming in through the windows. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "Look, Millie!" Millie opened her eyes as well, and both girls watched as the shadow from under the bed shrunk back from the rays of sunlight that were growing brighter by the second. Sarah was certain that she could hear something under the bed growling. Sarah heard a sob. Millie was crying. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked her sister. "The shadow is gone now. We're safe." "For now," Millie said loudly. "But what about tonight, and tomorrow night, and the night after that?" Sarah's heart sank. Her sister was right. They would never be safe. Not in this bed, not in any bed. The shadow had always followed them from bed to bed, house to house. "I've got an idea," Sarah said, "but I need your help. Come on." The girls jumped off the bed, both of them watching the shadow closely. It never moved in the past when the sun was out, but after their close call, neither of them were willing to take any chances. "Here, take this," Sarah said as she picked up a hand mirror off the floor. "I'll use this one," she continued as she grabbed another one that had somehow not fallen off the dresser when she jumped on it earlier. "What do we need these for?" Millie asked, with a confused look on her face. "Go to the other side of the bed and do what I do," Sarah answered. Millie still looked confused, but she carefully stepped around the shadow and waited on the opposite side of the bed for more instructions. She nodded at her sister, and Sarah nodded back. Crouching down, Sarah put the mirror into one of the sunbeams that had found its way into the room. The light bounced off the mirror and made a bright spot on the ceiling. Slowly she turned the mirror, and the bright spot moved across the ceiling and down the wall. "Hold on," she whispered. "I don't know what's going to happen." She turned the mirror a little more, and the beam of light bounced off the silver glass and directly into the darkness under the bed. There was a sound, a scream, but not like a scream that Sarah or Millie had ever heard before. It was full of anger and pain and hate. It pierced through the room so loudly and so suddenly that both girls nearly panicked and ran away. But Sarah stood her ground, and when Millie saw that her sister was not leaving, she stood strong as well. Millie crouched down and used her mirror to shine another ray of light into the shadow under the bed. The scream grew louder, higher, and more full of anger, but the shadow was trapped. For once, the girls felt in control, and it felt good. The sun continued to rise. The beams of lights that the girls were sending under the bed grew brighter every second. There was one last shriek, louder than could be imagined. The mirrors that both girls held in their hands shattered, as did the large mirror on the dresser, spraying glass everywhere. Millie screamed, and Sarah prayed. Then there was silence. It filled every corner of the room, just complete silence. There was not even the sound of the girls breathing. "Is it over?" Millie asked quietly, her voice softly breaking the silence. "I think so," Sarah said. "Look under the bed." Millie got on her hands and knees and peeked into the space beneath the bed, a place that she had dared not to look for years. There was a shadow, but it was a normal shadow. She could see through it. She could see the floor under the bed covered with dust and crumbs. She could see Sarah's bare feet on the other side. "I can't believe it," Millie said, standing up and running to hug her sister. "You did it! The shadow is gone!" Sarah held her sister tightly. Both of them were crying and holding each other tight now. "We did it, Millie," Sarah said. "Not just me. You were brave too." That night, both of them slept with one eye open, waiting for the shadow to return. The night after that, they slept better than they had ever slept before.